Welcome back to the Cream City Club podcast. I am Spencer Michaelis, and I am here once again with Gunnar Amelant. Gunnar, how are you doing this Friday afternoon?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I was gonna say I think it's our first Friday that we're recording on, so morale's a little bit higher since the work week's over. So hopefully some positive vibes today. But Spencer, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. I think the news we got shortly before we started, or the rumor we got shortly before we started recording this, probably got me a little more amped up to do this one. So I'm excited about it. Yeah, no, I'm doing pretty well though. Definitely excited that we are done with the work week. For those of you listening, and if you haven't yet subscribed, please take a moment to do so on whatever platform you are listening on. And if you feel that we have earned it, to rate us 5 stars. Follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod to stay up to date on these episode releases. And on Twitter at this moment, we are doing a giveaway of some autographed Brewer cards. So be sure to check that out and follow the instructions on the tweet in order to enter the contest. Um, but today's episode, we're going to be focused on the Bucks. So obviously they had we're going to go through all three games a little bit from this last week. So they had to go through a back-to-back over the weekend against two formidable Western Conference opponents this past weekend. They began it with a 129 to 118 win over the Warriors, and then an exhilarating, maybe not needed to be exhilarating, but an exhilarating 143 to 142 win over the Kings in overtime on Sunday. And then, of course, they followed that up with just an absolutely horrendous game against the Cavs. No Giannis, but they got destroyed 135 to 95. So, yeah, we're gonna start it off. We'll go through the three games. We're gonna talk about that rumor that I was discussing a little bit earlier, and then we are going to talk a little bit about the Pascal Siakam trade, and we're gonna give a little bit of a breakdown on the second apron, which is kind of a new concern from the new CBA, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means for the Bucks specifically as we get closer to the deadline and potentially impacting what they're looking at with this rumor that we're going to discuss as well. So we'll start with this Warriors game. Not much to talk about here, Gunner. I don't think we kind of saw
No.
just a solid game from the Bucks. It wasn't great. It wasn't anything special, but they beat a Warriors team without Steph. So anything specifically you want to touch on quick before we jump to the Kings?
Yeah, I mean Steph or no Steph, I don't think this Warriors team is very I mean you gave them a little bit of a you tossed them a bone there by saying formidable team, but I mean they're okay. Obviously they're in a tough stretch right now, but without Steph we shouldn't even really had to have worried about that one, but even that one was a little bit close towards the end, and then like I said, I'm not going to break it down completely, but I think Andre had a good stretch there. Um, I think we had a nice 10-0 run in the fourth or something that kind of quote unquote we pulled away a little bit at that point. And then this kind of the last note because we can probably tie it into this next game, and I know you want to highlight it. Marjon went a little viral on Twitter for looking sad in this one on the bench and not celebrating. And like I said, we can probably talk more about that because there's kind of a trend we noticed in these couple of games as we go into that Kings game. But that was kind of the start of maybe something that we noticed there. But I guess, yeah, as we slide into this Kings game, because we'll take the win in the Warriors game, not much to talk about, as we said. Um, just some early things to talk about here. No Chris in this Kings game. Um, no defense really, and that's kind of what you expect against the Kings. And the Bucks at this point, unfortunately, as much as we harp on it, we know what we're getting at this point. Um, and I think something that I noticed too is Sabonis kind of gave us a different look. And by the way, I'm gonna go over like the first like three-ish quarters here because we got a lot to talk about towards the end of that game. But I think Sabonis kind of gave us a new look as a center because he was kind of like a guy that you don't normally see. I think he can move pretty well, and then he's got the high pick and roll, high dribble handoff type of look that we gotta guard a little bit differently, which we're probably not used to. And kind of puts Brook in some weirder spots, but I thought he handled it okay. I mean, he had a really good game, obviously, Sabonis, but it is what it is. And then kind of another funny note, I think, before we go into the end of the game, and I can toss it to you to see if you have any notes, but we always kind of talk about Giannis's triple doubles, and it's not all of them this year, but I felt like this is another one where I kind of felt like it wasn't really his best game necessarily again, and it just kind of felt like he was doing a lot of good stuff. It was just like I didn't super notice it. Like, oh my God, he's got a triple double all of a sudden, and in classic Giannis fashion, that's just kind of how it happened. But he had a good game too, obviously. So, did you notice anything specifically in those first three quarters before we fast forward to the end of that fourth? Because I obviously got a lot to say about that.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I mean, those first three quarters, well, cards on the table, I was only watching off and on a little bit. We were watching the Packers while that well, most of the first half was going, but I didn't notice anything too out of the ordinary. Like you said, Sabonis kind of he's difficult for most centers to guard just because of the way he plays and the way he passes out of the post. It's kind of like a I don't even want to say like a poor man's Jokic, but it's just a little worse version of Jokic in some ways. He loves to get it in the post and then pass out of it. He loves getting to his left, and he can just kind of do it methodically. And I'm sure he's just very annoying to try and guard. He's kind of a high elbow type guy with when he's got the ball in his hands too. So he's kind of swinging arms around and just naturally probably an annoying guy to face. But no, I thought Giannis, from what I was seeing, was doing a pretty good job of attacking. I think he settled once or twice for some jumpers like we normally are going to get once or twice a game. Um, but yeah, I also would not have guessed that he had a triple double until I saw the numbers at the end. I know he got the assist late. It was the Brook three actually in overtime, which again we'll get to all that. But um, yeah, I didn't think it was his best game either, and I did notice that he was minus 13, which was worst on the team during that game. So he's always seemed to struggle a little bit with Sabonis. Seems like he gives him some trouble. I think Sabonis does a really good job of anticipating what Giannis wants to do and kind of getting in the way. He's not the quickest guy, but he's a pretty smart player, and Giannis can be a little predictable at times. So that was mostly what I was noticing early on. I guess you quickly touched on Ajax having that really good game against the Warriors. Obviously, he got in foul trouble really quickly in this game. 10 minutes and five fouls. He, I think he still made an impact when he was out there, but he just could not stay away from, he just could not keep his hands off of them. And it seemed like he was probably getting a little ticky tack whistle, which is not unexpected or new for him. So that's still something while I think he is getting a bad whistle, I think he's got to start at this point, halfway through the season, kind of figuring out how much is allowed and how much isn't, and hopefully being able to avoid this type of foul trouble. But yeah, I mean, those were my main takeaways. The fourth quarter is when everything got exciting and then beyond, obviously.
Yeah, so what I want to talk about here is kind of fast forwarding to that last 30 seconds ish, and I was watching, and that had to be the longest last minute of a game I think I've ever watched in my life as a Bucks fan, which is probably not true. Again, that's just me, whatever. But um, so I'll kind of break down what happened in that last sort of 20 seconds and maybe why I don't agree with how we handled things. So. I gotta say it was like maybe 17 seconds left. We decided to start playing the follow game up three, um,
Yep.
which I don't know how that makes any mathematical sense whatsoever. I think normally you obviously kind of expect it to be with like 5 to 9 seconds left on the clock to where you can get the ball back, and then they're going to be in a really tough spot with no timeouts. I think they might have probably had at that point by the time they got their last possession. Um, Definitely not a chance to where both teams can have multiple possessions, and then you could potentially lose a game doing that. So yeah, so we fouled, and I think they definitely made both, and then we came back, and Giannis demands the ball 2 times, and look, he made 3 out of 4, and demand the ball is probably a bad way to phrase it, but I just think Giannis, and it's hard for stars too to be like, okay, Giannis can't be in the game at the end of the game. Like that's not going to happen. Like he's going to play in the last 20 seconds, whether it's a free throw game at that point or not. We just have to be smart enough to know that Giannis either has to inbound the ball or he's got to be setting a screen for somebody. Like he can't be the one that's getting the ball. But either way, I mean, he made 3 out of 4. So I mean, normally I would take that out of Giannis for sure. But that's the situation where if you're playing your cards and you're saying, okay, with 20 seconds ish left, that you're basically saying we need to make 4 out of 4 free throws to make this what we want to happen. And you gave it to a guy who's not good at free throws, and he made 3 out of 4. Um, Long story short, uh, De'Aaron Fox comes up the court pretty fast, hits a layup, and then now I think we were, what was that at that point? We were tied, I think. Or, well, yeah, that was how the game ended.
Yeah.
We were tied.
Yeah. Dame took
Um,
one from 3/4 court, but
yeah.
that was it.
Um, so anyways, yeah, we traded those baskets, then we're tied at that game. But going into Adrian Griffin's comments, he kind of said that the ph philosophy after that Bulls game, which we've talked about pretty in depth, um, where we didn't foul, we were up three with a couple seconds left, so that's the time when you should do it. And Caruso hit like a magical 3-point shot to tie the game, and we ended up losing. So he kind of said that, look, our philosophy ever since that game, which I feel like we've had a couple games where I feel like we could have done this and we didn't do it. So I don't know if that's actually true, but again, maybe I'm just thinking of something wrong. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk too much further. Do you have anything to say on that part? Because I feel like I'm going to go off on a tangent here. But um, I guess just to wrap it up, I don't think that this game was not the Bulls game. I guess is what I wanted to say. That was not the situation that we had here. But yeah, I guess before we go into too deep, do you have any thoughts on that sequence in general?
Yes. I think that Griffin screwed up pretty much everything he could screw up in that time frame. I mean, he did everything wrong. He did. Um, and the Bucks didn't help themselves either. But we're talking first, like you said, a 3-point game, and you're trying to foul for the first time. They ended up calling a timeout, I want to say, and then we fouled with like 13 left.
Hmm.
Um, but we're fouling with 13 left with them out near half court, not even having put down a dribble yet, up three. Well, like you said, that leaves time for multiple possessions, especially since they're going to be fouling the Bucks. And when you start playing the foul game that early, you are relying on your players to make every free throw. It's not a matter of like, oh, we can go 3 or 4 and be in a decent spot. No, if you miss one, you're in a really bad spot. And to me, first of all, this is kind of a sign of a lot of things that we've seen with Griffin, and it's that he makes what he considers to have been a mistake. And like in the Bulls game, I agree that it was a mistake. And then he overcorrects something to a point where he's trying to like make a point, or he's like, I can't mess that up again. I'm going to do it now. We've talked about it kind of with ejections, where he feels like, oh, I should have gotten thrown out of this game. So he just goes and gets a tech the next game about nothing. Like there's no reason to get it, and he goes out and he gets one. Um, it felt like in this game he overcorrected that mistake by just saying we got to foul, we're up three, and it didn't make sense. Now I will say the first time that Giannis got the ball, and I agree with you, the most ideal thing would be Giannis passing the ball in. I will say I have seen Giannis get a number of 5-second violations in that situation trying to he's not good at it. Like he's not good at passing the ball in, which is another issue. Um, the first play was Giannis was in the backcourt and they fired it long to him, and Dame was sprinting towards him to come get the ball. And instead of just flipping it to Dame, when he had space to do that, Giannis decided to take a dribble and get fouled. That one was on Giannis to me. That play looked like it was designed to go Giannis to Dame to get him the ball. It was a creative way actually to get Dame the ball, and it shouldn't have put Giannis in foul trouble because, or in trouble of possibly being fouled. I mean, um, because he had a ton of separation when he caught the ball. Instead, he dribbles a few times, he gets fouled. Now he did make both of those, so that was fine. But then the next time there really wasn't a play, it didn't feel like, to get anybody open. And we were out of timeouts at that point, so it's not like we had to get the ball in. So I don't blame Pat for getting the ball to Giannis because he was open. But there wasn't a play like to get Dame a look. There wasn't any type of press break in place to get Dame a look, and or to get the ball, not a look, but to get him the ball. And that's who the ball should be going to. It's a 90-some% free throw shooter. Second option should be Chris. Third option on the court should be Brooke. And then Giannis is your last resort if he's not passing it in. And there just was nothing designed, it felt like, to get him the ball. And then, yeah, like you said, he split him. Fox goes down, scores with relative ease on just a straight breakaway layup, basically, even though it shouldn't have been. Um, it the whole execution by the players wasn't good, but the plan just made no sense from the beginning. I the weird part and the tough part for me to swallow at that point is that the Kings were being instructed by an assistant coach, and it felt like he was making much smarter decisions than Griffin down the stretch, and that's concerning. And I will say, Jordi Fernandez, that's who it was. is one of the names that popped up a lot as a potential head coaching candidate this last year, and he was a guy I was pretty interested in. So seeing him outcoach what it felt like outcoach Griffin down the stretch was not super fun, but um, yeah, hopefully he learns from it. I mean, like we said, there's a lot of things. Those are types of things that are kind of first year coach making mistakes in situations he's not used to, but it it was very poorly coached in the final few minutes. And that falls, we haven't really talked about this, but that also falls on his assistants. There's got to be better help. Like, is Joe Prunty adding anything? If he thinks this is good, he's his head assistant and he's on board with this. That's not super exciting either, because you need the assistants to be able to explain, like, no, fouling with 15 seconds left doesn't make sense here, Adrian. Let's wait, make them
Hmm.
try and make a three, or if it starts now, if they start running the clock out, now we start fouling while they're dribbling. I don't know. It was a frustrating end. Obviously, it ends up going to overtime. The Bucks are looking like they're down and out at that point. I mean, I was pretty much resigned to the fact that they were going to lose.
Hmm.
Um, Malik Monk, who's an 80 some percent free throw shooter, goes to the line at that point up four, correct?
Yep.
And misses both. And Giannis comes down, makes a pass to Brook, who kind of does his shuffle to the 3-point line that he has not been very successful on this year, and happens to nail this one. And it's a 1-point game. De'Aaron Fox, who is not as good of a free throw shooter as I thought he was going to be when they showed that he was like 72%. I would have expected it to be higher than that, but he splits them, and then it was Dame time. So, I mean, we can talk about honestly the play to I don't know, I don't know if it's that much of a play, but it was a designed action to get Dame that type of uh, opportunity to take that type of shot.
Hmm.
We could talk quick. They talked about it after the game, Giannis and Griffin and Dame, but the original plan was to try and get it to Giannis, who was going to give it back to Dame, and then Brooke was going to be standing at like half court to try and hit Fox with a screen. So I actually like that design. I think that's a pretty good idea. It would be hard to be able to run Fox into a screen with that much space, but Dame's pretty good at doing that. So who knows? I also worry a little bit about Brooke moving on a screen right there,
Hmm.
because he does tend to do that at times. But the general idea made sense to me. The Kings completely denied Giannis the ball. Fox did. And honestly, this ended up working, I think, a lot better because of it. So Brook flashes to the ball from beyond half court. He comes inside half court, catches it, gives it immediately back to Dame, who's in a full sprint at the time he catches it. And then he kind of slowed down as he was crossing half court. And I think there was multiple reasons. One, he wanted to get to the left side, which I think he's more comfortable shooting from like middle or going left. Although, the Paul George shot was going right, so who knows? But he seems to like going left. Um, and I think he also was kind of in the mode of the Bucks almost were expecting him to drive, it sounded like. And he was kind of in the mode of, I am not playing a double overtime. I'm either winning this game or we are going home on the second of a back to back. Like, this is going to end right here either way. And I mean, when he got to that spot, as soon as it left his hands, you could kind of tell it was like, oh, that might go in right away.
Hmm.
And yeah, then it did go in, and it was a great end to a very fun sports day. But yeah, I don't know if you had anything else in overtime, or if you want to just talk about kind of how you saw all of that play out.
Yeah, first I think I want to mention quick for the Giannis free throws, and the classic guy who I hate Giannis shooting. I think there's probably some crowd out there that says like this is good, this is a regular season game, like he should like build some stones and like make these free throws and I think even Adrian, I'm pretty sure I heard that he had a comment where he's just like I have full confidence in Giannis to make those free throws. Like, yeah, I know you're supposed to have confidence in your MVP to make shots. Maybe it's just be on your coach to like not have that happen, but I guess there is maybe a crowd to where is this game like huge to win, and is what's more important, Giannis building confidence at the free throw line, or we win a game by 1 point? I don't know. I guess it's up for debate, but so that's just kind of that. I still wouldn't have that happen, but I guess you could say that Giannis built some stones doing that. Fast forwarding to the Dame shot. Yeah, I mean, you broke it down. He said that he just kind of wanted to get into space when he got past the half court line. And I think to your point, he can probably go left, right, forward, backwards. He's just good. So he can get to any of his shots. But I think going sidestepping from like 5 to 7 feet behind the line to your left away from the basket is just I don't even know how people I don't know if like I'm sure Steph can do it. There's probably a very small hand of people who can actually make that shot, but that's just incredibly hard. Um, Going away from like your strong hand too. I mean, you're literally falling away from the basket. But he created that was my first thing I noticed is how much space he created just on that sidestep because they had a couple different angles that we saw after the game, and I was just like, he got like a ton of space because I thought he was going to get blocked at first. And then you brought up Brook Lopez. I thought for sure we are going to get a moving screen, even though they probably wouldn't call it at the end of the game anyways. But he was kind of in a weird spot where like Dame kind of got around Brook. And then I'm like, well, please don't even set the screen at this point because it's going to be worthless. Um, but yeah, then obviously I texted you, hit the shot. Now it's just like that's if we never play another Bucks game ever again, and that's just how the NBA ends, I'll be happy because that was exactly what I wanted out of Dame. Outside of all of like the just him being him, we kind of wanted one signature Damian Lillard moment. But we should also mention on that shot too. That was his 2,500th career three. Kind of funny that he'll probably never forget that one then. So, yeah, I mean, we could spend all day talking about Dame. That was one of the best moments. Honestly, that was probably one of the best shots I've ever seen as a Bucks fan.
Yep.
Um, I was trying to think I was going to have a little game that we could play of like maybe you have one at the top of your head that's your favorite buzzer beater, but my first one that I thought of was Mo Williams,
Yep.
where he kind of falls on his back because when I was a kid, I used to just be like in my driveway and I used to just like imitate that shot like over and over again, like shooting a 3-pointer and then falling on
Yep.
my back. I thought it was so cool, but I know Jennings had like an opening night one or whatever, and Michael Redd had a nice one at the top of the key. But I guess you have a favorite one quick that you can
Um,
think of.
you hit all of mine that I was going to say. The only other one is the Chris Middleton one against the Heat, which came at the end of that
Oh,
huge.
yeah,
It was a
I thought of
huge
that one too.
comeback. Zaza saves the ball right to Chris, who has probably .7 to get that thing off and
Yeah,
nails it. And then Jim Paschke's call was great too. Just
yeah,
Jason
no,
Kidd
that was
sprinting out of
definitely a
there.
good
It
one.
was like it was his birthday. Yeah, he was like, "Happy birthday, Jason Kidd! This place is up for grabs." And that was like
Uh,
I remember that was one of the loudest regular season Bradley Center crowds I remember. Just
hmm
everybody was so into it because it was like a 16-point game with only I want to say 5 minutes left or something. So that game was
Yeah.
huge. But that Pacers Mo Williams one would be the one for me. And
hmm
that one that was also a huge comeback to kind of win that game. So yeah, no, it was I would probably it'd be between that and the Mo Williams one, the Dame one and the Mo Williams one for me for sure.
And
Um
I believe that was the first time we actually got Dame pointing to his watch as
it
a
was.
Milwaukee Buck. So
Yep.
we'll never forget that one for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
The picture
Again,
after was great with all
oh
of
my
them doing
God,
it
yeah,
and then
that's.
Thanasis squared up like he was gonna box, but everyone else got it.
And then I saw it trending on Twitter how they said that Dame cropped him out of the photo on Instagram, which I guess he technically did, but I think Dame just wanted him centered in the photo.
Right.
But it's okay, I guess. We Thanasis has
Don't
gotten a lot of heat the last couple of games on Twitter, and I think even ESPN might have even posted like a thing about him on the Cavs game. But um,
yeah, he
yeah, I
gets
mean, yeah,
he gets it from everybody right now. He's
yeah,
getting ripped on a lot. I feel kind of bad for him, but he's also kind of living the life, so I don't feel too bad for him.
yeah, he's all right. But yeah, again, we can talk about Dame forever. But another funny thing that happened in this game to maybe wrap it up, Mike Brown, I think he got tossed in the third quarter, or is it the
It
start
was
of the
right at the
fourth?
beginning of the fourth.
Okay, yeah. So it was right at the top of the fourth. And he got his money's worth just on that. I think he
Oh
might
yeah,
even touch Pat in the court. He might have even done, and then
he did.
he made sure to get ejected from that one. And then fast forward to the end of the game, he gave us a nice presentation, which was an A+ execution on his part. So I think he got double fined actually. He probably got the double amount because for doing two different things,
Yep.
but it was hilarious. And obviously all the memes and stuff of I saw a funny one where they like fast forwarded it with like funny noise over it, have him like explaining what happened. And I think he did have a point on the specific play, but I mean, what like
Yeah.
I think it was Fox who barely touched somebody or whatever, but it's just like Fox gets those calls too. So
Yeah.
it's a close game, and it was any nitpick of a thing was gonna kind of change the momentum of the game, but. Um, I think he was just kind of fired up from a collection of stuff at that point. But
Yeah.
um, just wanted to shout him out because that was obviously a great ejection. And um, I,
Yeah.
I just feel like we cannot avoid these like viral things this year. Like we got the Giannis running off the court. It's I don't know what it is, but we just keep getting tied up with all these like antics that have nothing to do with basketball really. But um, I guess it's making news, so we'll take it.
Yeah.
Um,
No, that was up there for some of the best, one of the best ejections I've seen in quite some time. Like you said, he touched Pat, which is not something that normally happens. You don't normally make contact with the other team's player while doing it. Um, he looked like he just went into a blind rage and didn't know what was going on. Now like you said, he absolutely had a point. Fox, he showed like Fox barely clipping Dame on a three, and then the play that happened that led him to get ejected was Fox coming around a screen and Beasley just wrapped up his arm from behind and pulled him, and Fox like got caught up. He got through fine. He took another dribble and then he turned the ball over right away after. I
mhm,
think Brown was just making a point in some ways of saying like you got to give us the same exact whistle, but it's just NBA refs are just simply not very good right now. I think they just aren't good anymore. Like I think there's a lot of things they have to worry about that they didn't used to have to worry about,
mhm,
which definitely makes it more difficult. But I think it's just gotten to a point where there's a lot more like egos in the game for refs and a lot of people who hold grudges and people who want to make a point, and it's not a great place to be in for an officiating from an officiating standpoint. But um yeah, no, that was fun. And the little PowerPoint he gave was great. I mean, just straight up bringing all the evidence to the table and saying, this is what I saw. This is what they missed. This is what they told me. This is why I didn't like it. It's like, he could not have done it better. Yeah, I guess the only other thing we should touch on this game is you briefly talked about it with the Warriors game, but another Marjon uh, DNP CD. I mean, he did not play. It was not an injury. It wasn't sickness. It was nothing. It's coach's decision. Do
mhm.
we think? And obviously, he got some. We'll talk about the Cavs game in a second briefly, but he got a little bit of time in that one. But who wouldn't have in that type of score? Um,
Mhm.
is he? Do you think he's in the doghouse? Is Griff just kind of one starting to shorten up the rotation a little bit, where he's trying to just, in general, have fewer people playing? Is he just trying to give Ajax more of an opportunity? I mean, what do we think it is? And then you also touched on the fact that he looked like he might have been pouting a little bit during the Warriors game. Obviously, I noticed it too, and then I saw it on Twitter, so that made me feel a little bit more.
Mhm.
I don't want to just a little more concerned about it in general because I had noticed it
Mhm.
myself, and then other people were noticing it. But I will say, I mean, he was very excited after the Dame buzzer beater. You could tell he was happy while things were happening in that game. It didn't look like it was the same thing. I don't know if maybe there had been a conversation before the Warriors game or what it was. I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. I do think, and I said this to you, I think it's kind of how he operates. Like he's not an emotional guy in terms of like big time. He does it when he dunks, but otherwise he's not like a big bench celebrator or anything.
Mhm.
And he never has been. But it did feel different to me. And when other people noticed it too, it's a little concerning. You don't want a guy to be that it's a selfish look. Whether it was selfish or not, whether he was being selfish or not, it looks selfish. And you don't really want that around the team if that's the case. But um yeah, I guess let's skip. We don't need to talk too much about that. But in general, what do you think about the lack of playing time?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a mix of everything you said. I think he could be in the doghouse. We talked about some trades opportunities and stuff like that, but the weirdest one about this one with the Kings game is that there is no Chris. So I mean, if you're gonna play Marjon, I feel like that's like the perfect opportunity to do it. And I think it was a mix before this game, I should say, before I said that. But this was like kind of the first game that I was like just concerned, like on paper, because like I said, with no Chris, it's just like okay, well that's like very purposeful at this point. Um, and then we can get into, I mean, we already got into the bench stuff a little bit, but for me, um, I don't like for all the reasons you just said, I don't that's why I don't love reading into like, oh, a guy didn't like celebrate on the bench or something. Like he was just kind of sitting down where it's like he also was like three guys were in front of him jumping and stuff. So maybe he just kind of felt like, well, I'm tired, whatever. I don't know. It's still not a great teammate move, but I just don't like reading into that stuff totally. But being a young guy too, I just think, and you mentioned like Andre Jackson, like he's a guy who always like gets up and celebrates, and he's had DMPs this year, or at least games where he hasn't played very many minutes. And he always seems like a guy who's engaged and involved in everything. So again, last episode we talked about trades and stuff. So I'm not super sweating that Marjon Beauchamp's not playing because he hasn't been super um a guy who I really need to see play because he hasn't done a ton of stuff on the floor yet that we love. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it for me. I wouldn't worry about it technically because we don't really have to worry about it, but um, who knows what happens at this point. But again, we can go into that Cavs game next, but I
Yeah.
think got like 20 minutes in that game. But like you said,
Yeah.
that's just we're tossing a dart at a dartboard at that point. Who's going to get minutes in that one? So
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Like I said, I try not to be body language police, and I get really annoyed when people do it for baseball players, so I should probably teach myself that lesson for basketball players, but um it just felt different than what I'm normally seeing from him, so that was why I noticed it. But I do think I think Marjan's like a really nice person. I don't think he would be doing it from a bad place. Um but I do think he was probably feeling kind of sorry for himself, and that is going to happen. It seemed like it was gone by the Kings game. Who knows if someone said something? Maybe he noticed that he was just kind of not in the right headspace during that game and corrected it. So whatever it was, I think I doubt we see it again. Um, but yeah, we can briefly talk about this Cavs game. So I was actually at a work dinner for pretty much the whole first half of the game, and I did not feel too bad about missing it. It was not the worst first half for me to miss. I caught most of the third quarter, and then the fourth quarter, it was on in the background, but I really wasn't paying attention. It seemed like nothing went well for pretty much anybody. The only bright spot in that game was probably Jay Crowder coming back and
hmm
looking okay. He
yeah, I think
wasn't
he had like
even,
four threes,
yeah,
and yeah, I mean, again, it's just we're down by like 20. We got down to a 20. We're down 20-2 to start the game. So at that point, I mean, how well are guys guarding you on the three-point line and stuff like that? But either way, it's nice to see him make some shots. We should also probably know it as like a big sore thumb in this one is Giannis was out with a couple days of rest, I think, at that point. Um, which was a little bit concerning. I think he said it kind of popped up, and he had the shoulder sleeve in the game before.
yep,
Um, and this obviously gets traced back to the Jabari Smith,
yep,
um, totally clean, common foul by him. No extracurricular activities when he tried hitting Giannis and just acting like he's gonna a football player trying to knock him over. So nothing to see there at all, but. I think he's going to be okay, obviously, but it was weird seeing that he had a couple days of rest and then it kind of popped up. Um, and then obviously with the sleeve, like I said, that's not very fun to witness. And then Chris in this one was like 1 for 10.
yep.
I won't make too much of it, but it wasn't probably Chris's best game either. And you need kind of one of him or Dame to step up, and Dame was pretty meh in this one as well. And then going behind the eight ball that much, as I used to say, down 20-2. I mean, if not one of them is going to step up, you're not going to come back in this one. We didn't have enough firepower without Giannis. Um, I don't even think, did Malik even score in this one? I don't even think he even scored.
Yeah, he
Um,
was one of six. So
yeah,
Dame, Chris, and Malik combined to
those
get
are our
9
guys.
of 36. 9 of
Yeah.
36 between those three. Without Giannis like that, they were never winning that game. It didn't matter what anybody else on the court did in that one.
Yeah. And I mean, AJ Green got a little life here too, but he didn't do well again. I think he played even a little bit in that Kings game and he didn't really do much.
Yeah,
So it's a little disappointing to see him, but he's a shooter. So I mean, if shots are falling, he looks like he's amazing. If they're not going to fall, then he's not looking too good. So, yeah, I mean, those are my main notes for this one, I guess, at this point, because there's not really much to talk about outside
no,
of just that it was embarrassing and yeah.
yeah. I guess we should probably point out Campaign's been on a little bit of a scoring heater because he he scored 15 in 11 and a half minutes in that Kings game, and that
Spencer,
was
I'm not
that
going
was
to point
pretty
out
important.
campaign doing successful at any point this year.
Well, I'm gonna give him his love because we don't get the opportunity to do it very much. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
and he is doing well, and he is doing it within, like you said, he's doing it within that like 10 to 15 minute kind
yep,
of scoring or whatever, that minute that we wanted him to be in. And if that's how he's going to take advantage of those minutes, I mean, he's for sure a positive. I definitely like seeing that.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well. I think we should. Should we move? Let's talk a little bit about the Siakam trade and how it affects us because I think it might be leading a little bit into potentially the rumor that we were talking about as well. So on, I want to say Wednesday, the Pacers acquired Pascal Siakam for Bruce Brown, our good old friend Jordan Nwora, and 3 first-round picks. So just kind of looking at this from the Bucks perspective, how, if at all, does this affect the Bucks and the way they kind of look at the next few weeks before the trade deadline, or how does it affect maybe their chances in the East, given the Pacers adding some more talent to their team?
Yeah, I love how this trade was just not glorified. I think it obviously is a bigger trade for sure, and that he definitely helps them. And I can break it down sort of from the Pacers aspect in a second, but I just it was just funny to me how the national media just acted like the Pacers just hit a home run. But then I think back to like when we got Drew Holiday, and then it's just like the Bucks' future's ruined. They gave up 3 first-round picks. We're never gonna recover from this. Um, and then I love them saying how they're kind of going over on TNT. Um, I was watching those games a little bit in the pregame show, and they're going over like who like now that the Pacers have like this great super team, who are they gonna who do they match up against? And of course, they gave the Celtics all the praise that they should. The Sixers, they kind of gave their praise, and they're like the Bucks. So like the Bucks, they don't fear the Bucks. They've beaten them 4 out of 5 times, and it's just like my gosh, like I'm just so and like it's true. Like we definitely have concerns against them, but I think back to like, and maybe you can fact check me on this. I think the year that we played the Heat in the playoffs with like Brandon Jennings in his last season, didn't we beat the Heat like twice that year? Like
At least, yeah.
I don't think the Heat feared us for 1 millisecond. And I'm not saying the Pacers are like that bad of a team as the Bucks were, but like I don't think the 4 wins carries over to a playoff series necessarily. So it's just speaking from them, like I like Siakam a lot. I think I didn't even know this really about him, I guess, because I don't watch the Raptors a ton, but he is a good like transition player, so he does fit perfectly kind of in that scheme with them. Um, I've never super loved him overall. Um, I just kind of feel like he's like a kind of not to disrespect this guy as well, but he's kind of like a Julius Randle to me, where like he thinks he's the number one, and he can kind of be an imposter sometimes. It kind of look like it and fool you a little bit, but he doesn't shoot necessarily great, and maybe he'll shoot better now that he's kind of like he probably is like a second option on this team, but instead of having like the main focus on him and with the Raptors, but I like him. He definitely moves their needle up a little bit, and I don't think I've gotten like super more concerned with him, but from the Pacers aspect, I mean, they didn't give up any of their young guys, which you kind of thought they might have had to at that point, but I'm sure they had like a dilemma where they could have gave up like Ben Mathurin, or they could have gave up like Aaron Nesmith or Jarris Walker, who they had, and then they could have gotten like 2 less 1st-round picks they gave up or 1 less, whatever. But so they probably made that trade on purpose to be like, we only want to keep our young guys, and maybe a team to watch too if they trade those young guys and get another piece. That I think I'd be a little bit more concerned then. Um, but yeah, I mean. I guess, what do you think as far as that trade? Do you think that this really affects us um, in sort of a matchup way? Because I wasn't really moved that much, even though I do like the trade and it is a good trade for them for sure. But as far as the straight up matchup, I don't really think I'm like incredibly scared now.
No, I agree. I think Siakam is another nice body for them to be able to throw at Giannis, which is not a bad thing for them. But he hasn't exactly been a huge Giannis stopper over the course of his career. He's done a decent job on him, don't get me wrong. But I mean, let's look back even this was young Siakam at that point, but
Hmm.
Kawhi was the one guarding Giannis in that playoff series, and it was still just an entire team effort to do it. That's what the Pacers are going to need either way. We've seen it. If they don't throw a ton of bodies at Giannis, he can go off for 64 points. So it's, I think in terms of affecting the Bucks, it may make them a little bit more aggressive, and it does add another team, I would say, to the mix of, okay, I could see them coming out of the East if everything goes right for them in the playoffs. Um, but I did. Bruce Brown's been kind of off and on injured this year and stuff. I do think that's a legitimate loss for what they already were lacking, which was kind of the same thing as the Bucks, which is point of attack defense. Um, so losing him isn't super ideal for them, I wouldn't say, but it is a definite upgrade in terms of pure talent. They I will say I believe, and I don't know for sure, but I want to say two of the first round picks they moved weren't their own.
Hmm.
And I think that is part of the difference between what the Bucks had to do versus what they did, in that the Bucks were moving pretty much all of their assets in that trade when they made it, all of their movable assets, and the Pacers still have a decent amount of them. That being said, this is what markets like Indianapolis and Milwaukee have to do to get players that they would not get in free agency. They wouldn't get them. And I think it gets overlooked that like they might have to overpay to do that. And obviously you look at the Dame trade and it's like, okay, well, in that scenario, you probably didn't really have to pay as much as you would have thought. But at the time, the Drew trade was by a lot of people viewed as not necessarily an overpay, but a really, really steep price to pay for it. And if we didn't win the championship in 2021, we may have looked at it somewhat similarly. If we had never won the ring and then ended up trading him, it might look a little bit more like that to us too. I still would say, oh well, it was well worth the effort and the attempt, even if it
Hmm.
hadn't worked out. But I do think there was I get why some people would look at it and be like, okay, the Bucks traded every first round pick they could trade and kind of limited themselves to pick swaps for 2 more years, which we're still seeing the effects of. But in the end, it worked out. We won a ring. If the Pacers even advance deep into the playoffs, I feel like they're going to feel pretty good about this trade. Um, but if they're like a first round exit the next couple of years and those firsts end up being used on some players they would have enjoyed and Siakam's just not that great, then yeah, I could end up looking bad. Like I said, I don't think it affects the Bucks themselves too much, but I will say the only thing I could see coming out of this, and I don't even know if it's a real possibility or what the odds of it would be, but I don't know if the Raptors would be interested in. Obviously, they like Bruce Brown as they took him part of the trade, but I would be interested in if they would be looking to move him to gather some
Hmm.
more like young assets, and I wonder if the Bucks could get involved in that way. So would you have any interest? Do you think the Bucks would be interested, and do you think they have like a good match for what it might take to get him?
Yeah. So first thing to wrap up the Siakam thing, 'cause I just thought of this while you're talking. He is a free agent at the end of the year, which I'm sure they
Yeah.
traded for him knowing that, and he probably is going to sign a long-term extension. But I'm kind of secretly hoping now that he leaves because it's kind of funny. But yeah, I'm sure he'll be there for long-term anyways. But as far as Brown goes, I think at first, and now that these new rumors have happened, it's did not help my thinking at all on this. But at first, I was like, oh yeah, for sure, sign me up. Like Bruce Brown was just in a final series, kind of fits, like you said, the Pacers needed. It seemed like he kind of fit the same mold that we kind of want. I guess at this point, I just don't know if it's our best trade option that we could get. But if you came up to me and said, Gunnar, this is either Bruce Brown or you got to keep your same team, I am 100% taking Bruce Brown. Because I do think he helps us in areas that we need for sure. And like I said, he was just in a playoff series where, look, he is kind of like an undersized four, probably. Just he kind of reminds me of a little bit of like a PJ Tucker-ish because he is kind of undersized like that. Kind of does like the dirty work where he can get like rebounds and stuff, but he also kind of played a little bit backup point guard, I think, too, in that series. Didn't watch a ton of it because I was just depressed from the Bucks at that point, but um, I, that's kind of a thing that I was hoping that we can maybe acquire. I think last episode I said it where maybe a guard who can take some of those like campaign minutes where you're not necessarily needing a backup point guard, but someone who can kind of just help us for that stretch. And he can kind of ball handle too a little bit. So I think he could handle that pretty well. Um, doesn't shoot very well either. I think he shoots a lot better than he did like with the Brooklyn Nets, but not like a 3 and D technically. But yeah, I mean, I think he helps us in a lot of different aspects, but probably not my first option. But again, it depends on what's available. But if you told me that we got Bruce Brown for Bobby Portis and Pet, and I won't be mad at all. But I guess what do you think? I'm sure you like Bruce Brown.
Yeah, I think I'd probably be more excited than you would be in that scenario, but it also would not be like my number one choice or priority. Though it would be up there. He he is just it's a lot of PJ type of abilities and the way he plays is similar. The thing for me is that he does bring more on offense than PJ does. Like you said, he's not a great 3-point shooter, but he's improved a ton. He's a pretty decent finisher. When the Bucks were just letting him take floaters in that Nets series, he has gotten a lot better at that, and he seems to make those at a pretty high clip at this point. I would definitely be happy adding Bruce Brown. I would feel really good about going into games with him at the two and Beasley coming off the bench if that was the case. But I think there's probably other options out there, and one of them that might be is Dejounte Murray. And we got this rumor earlier today that from Chris Haynes, who, by the way, any Chris Haynes information we now get is going to be either very plugged in because of Dame and Giannis being like
Hmm.
that's their guy. Like they talk to Haynes and nobody else. And two, he seems to just be around the Bucks more because of that. So if he has sources, he may have more sources within the team as well. Um, but he tweeted earlier today, Milwaukee Bucks are among multiple teams who are registering interest in trading for Atlanta Hawks star Dejounte Murray. He uh, let me hear your initial thought. I know you you were texting me quite a bit as that tweet came out. So what were your initial thoughts on that?
You know we're about to fight, but I'll try not to. Much for your like we were talking about like Chris Haynes and stuff. My initial reaction was first that John Horst was the dog, just for even sniffing around at this possibility, and then two, being that it is Chris Haynes, like you said, he's so intertwined with the Bucks now that this to me either feels like we actually are trying to get DeJounte Murray, or there's a reason why we want this out, and we're trying to act like we're trying to get DeJounte Murray because we're trying to show that like we're trying to get better for sure. Um, but as far as like DeJounte Murray for sure, or speaking of on him, uh, when he was on like the Spurs, he definitely had like this rep of a defensive guard. Like I think I talked about even a couple of years ago. Me and you kind of had the same thinking, at least back then, where like if we didn't have Drew Holiday, I think I'd want DeJounte Murray as my point guard. And this was again a couple of years ago at that point, but a guy that we liked a lot back then. Since then, he's kind of turned into like a more offensive paralysis type of guy. Like he's really identified himself, and now this year he can really shoot a lot better too than really as well as he ever has. Um, I think on defense, there's just a lot to be excited about. And then also, I hear a lot of people question, like, maybe is his, I don't know what the right word is, but maybe is his like reputation better than what he actually is doing on defense nowadays? Because he is kind of a guy who's always gotten like a lot of steals, but that's kind of like the equivalent to like a cornerback getting interceptions sometimes, I feel like, or a guy who gambles a lot. If he does get 8 interceptions in a year, that's awesome. And if he does get like these steals a lot of the times, that's awesome. But is he actually playing like good defense all the time? I could see that being like a real question. But I think again, it's going to heavily depend on where I think this is where we're probably going to start fighting about it. But I'll get your initial reaction. It's going to depend on like what a package would actually look like for him. But the player, I would be super excited to get for sure. And I would definitely welcome him in the Bucks, and I'd be really excited about it. But how about you speak on the players first before we kind of break down how we could
Yeah.
actually acquire him?
Yeah. So I think what you touched on there with this defense is real. It has taken a pretty big step back. And I do think part of that is probably playing in a system that it just doesn't encourage defensive play from the guards. They told him and Trey to go out and be the offensive threats and then have guys like um why can't I think who's the small forward? Hunter.
Bojan? Oh yeah, DeAndre Hunter.
Yeah. Yes.
Bogdanovich too, the guy.
And Bogdanovich, yeah, but he's not playing defense either. But Hunter is,
Nope.
and it seems
Wes
like
Matthews as well.
they try and filter to like Capella and just they try and filter it to everything else, which is kind of the Bucks idea or what the Bucks idea
Hmm.
probably should be. It's not really how the Bucks are operating, but it's how it should be, and it makes me wonder how much of that is just the way he's being told to play defense instead of how he was told to play defense on the Spurs. But he is also getting a little older, and you wonder if he's just lost a tiny little step, and that can play a big role in defense declining. If you are getting the defender anywhere close to the Spurs version of what he was, then I'm a lot more interested in any package pretty much that it would take to get him, obviously within reason. If you are only getting the guy who has to have the ball in his hands a lot to be effective on offense and his defense is not at that level that it used to be, I don't know that he's actually very helpful for the Bucks. And I'm a big Dejounte Murray fan. I have loved him since his Washington days. I wanted the Bucks to end up with him in that draft. When the Spurs got him, I knew that was just an absolutely perfect fit
Mm.
for him. And obviously it worked out really well for him there. I do have worries about him. If he's the version of what he's been on the Hawks, there's not touches to go around on this offense right now. There just isn't. And if he can't play without those touches, that doesn't mean that he would have to go to like some 10% usage guy with the Bucks or something for it to work, but he would need to have the ball in his hands a lot less. And if he's not playing that same level of Spurs defense, I don't know if it'll work. That said, why don't we talk about what we'd be willing to give up in a trade for Murray? And I would love for you to go first on this one.
Um, well, first I'll say you spoke to like his age. I do think he fits Giannis's timeline a little bit better because he is like 27 or 28 or something. So I think that would slide in a little bit better, but he is for sure getting older. He came in younger too. You kind of forget he was on like those like he might have even played with like Tim Duncan at one point. I feel like he was like he's been around for a little bit longer than you think. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think the obvious trade that people have it's kind of like a Twitter meme where I think it was like a SpongeBob meme where they kind of go to like old reliable, and that's Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton and Marjon and our second round pick or something. But if that was the trade somehow, which I kind of highly doubt that's the trade, um, Horse hit a home run and a walk off grand slam in Game 7 to win the World Series because that's an incredible trade.
Yes.
We for sure won that at that point. And then at that point, if that is the trade, the concerns would be what you just said of there's one ball, there's at that point you got Giannis, Chris, Dame all trying to score. I mean, Chris doesn't try to score, but I mean, Dejounte tries to score at this point. So you got at least two guys who would need the ball and score. So I guess that would be concerns. So then you kind of hope at that point that it would be you're getting like a Spurs sort of version of him, at least the early Spurs, where he doesn't sort of need the ball all the time. Um, as far as now, this is where it's going to get a little bit dicey. As far as if that's not the trade, would you even consider cracking into some of the other guys that we got? Um, first, we just gotta bite. We gotta bite it off, Spencer. We gotta go right to Chris Middleton.
Nope.
I know your answer. I need to hear your answer. Um, I would still lean slightly no. Um, and I think if you asked me before Dame came here again, I would for sure say no. There's no question I would say no if Dame wasn't here and we still had like Drew. Um, then I'd probably want Drew to be traded at that point. I guess it would be different, but I talked to it a little bit in the last podcast of how I feel like our just maybe it's just my thinking or just I've kind of noticed how the NBA goes with like all these stars trading teams and everything. I just feel like you just always have to try to get better, and there is a little bit of like a loyalty factor with Chris, and you're gonna say that we're not better if we swap them out. So I know what your answer is to that, but um, this is more of a separate point of at what point do you just kind of always try to get better versus even if this moves the needle a little bit, is it worth getting rid of like Chris Middleton for him, even though you know what you're gonna get out of Chris? Is it worth taking like the home run hit to try to get Dejounte Murray for I think if Dejounte is like a Spurs type of guy where we get his defense and then we kind of also get like a good mix of his offense that he is now, we're gonna argue about it, but I think he is better than Chris Middleton at that point. But that's a big if that's actually what you're getting. If it's just the offensive guy who plays no defense, I think that's probably a little bit too big of a risk at that point for Chris Middleton. Um, I just Chris has made me slightly nervous this year, very, very slightly. Yeah, it's not necessarily anything that he's done. It's just like you're kind of still in the murky water of I think he's back. I think he's Chris. I think he can be the third guy for sure. I just need to see it slightly a little bit more and a little bit more effective, but also we still have 3 months to go. I'm confident it's probably going to happen. Like, and we've seen it in flashes, like his last probably stretch of games. He's gotten up to probably close to 30 minutes. He probably does have close to Chris numbers. Um, it's just on defense. He actually, in some spurts this year, really recently too, I think Chris has actually looked pretty decent on defense, and he's been healthy for the most part. So it's just part of it's like Adrian Griffin in my head. Like, does a Dejounte Murray fit better than a Chris in like Adrian's system? I don't know. My mind's kind of spinning, but I think I would lean a little bit no. But I'm definitely more accepting of it than you might be, but let's hear your take on first just on Chris Middleton if that was somehow a trade.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is mostly fair. I do think I I don't know. I'm sure I have bias when I watch Chris. I just don't I don't see him like any different than what I remember him being for the most part his entire time here. Probably a slight step slower because he's older and he has had injuries. He's had he's got his second highest true shooting percentage of his career this year. He has the second highest assist rate of his career this year. Like these are not he's not I think he's adjusted to being the third guy better than I could have even imagined him doing it. And if you take his like per 100 stats, he's basically doing the same thing he's done. He just doesn't have the same amount of minutes overall to show for it. And he's doing it with lower usage than he's had since Jason Kidd was the coach. Like to me, I think Chris is as good as he's been, other than probably his absolute best years, which were the first couple of Bud. Um, I just there's absolutely a case to be made that Dejounte would extend the window, which is an important thing. The honest window, as we're gonna call it. Like it would be losing years, obviously, in terms of, or you would be gaining years in terms of having potentially Dejounte for like an extra 4 or 5 years compared to what Chris is going to have less left in his career. I do hear that argument for sure. I think there is a very real risk that one, I don't think anybody has the chemistry with Giannis on the team that Chris has. I think Chris gets Giannis the easiest baskets of anybody. And I think you would probably lose that. DeJounte hasn't been great. He's been okay as like the facilitator in pick and roll, but Trey's the guy who does that for the Hawks. He didn't do it a ton for the Spurs because that really wasn't they ran pick and roll, but they also do a lot of ball movement side to side and stuff. Like it wasn't his role. Chris is kind of the guy that I trust honestly the most, other than obviously Dame. I trust quite a bit in pick and roll, but Chris is the guy for me. I also think you're just losing another guy who DeJounte can't guard wings and he couldn't do it when he was with the Spurs. So now you've lost a guy who you might have helped the guard defense a bit, but I don't think they've got Andre Jackson then pretty much who can guard like a Tatum and at least give him problems, or a Brown and at least give him some problems. And he's probably going to fall out in 15 minutes if he's in that role against those guys. Like it's going to be really, really hard. Chris is not this great defender, and there are people on both sides of that argument who exaggerate greatly on how his defense goes. Some people will say he can't guard anybody. That is 100% not true. He does a pretty good job. He struggles with quickness. I would still say he guards point guards and shooting guards this year better than Dame and Beasley have. So that's not a good thing for Chris. It's just that's how bad it's been from the guard positions. But when he's guarding wings, he does a fine job. He does a decent enough job for what he does, especially since he still is asked to carry a decent offensive load. I I would have to be I'm guessing their salaries aren't even, right? So we would probably be getting extra in a trade.
Yeah. Well, Chris took a little bit less than like a max, so he's probably like around 32-ish this year,
Yeah.
and I think DeJounte's like 25.
Okay.
Because he took a little bit cheaper of a deal, shockingly, with he extended with the Hawks. I think it was like
Right.
four
Yeah.
for 100 last year or something. So yeah, you're probably like a $5 to $7 million difference at that point.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I could probably be more interested in it depending on whatever the secondary piece would end up being in that trade. But let's see. He's, oh, that can't be right. 18.2 and Chris is 29.3, it's saying.
Maybe
So,
he didn't kick in yet. Maybe he still is on that 18. Then that's the 4 years is after this year, maybe. I guess yeah, that could be true
yeah,
actually
it
because
looks
they
like
got him
that's,
last year. Yeah.
it does look like that's what it is. So, well, it looks like it's in the end, the Hawks would still need to give up about 4 million more in money for it to actually work under all the rules.
hmm
So there would still need to be a secondary piece, but
I think there's like a trade kicker too. So I
that,
heard that in a different podcast before
yep,
we were even mentioned on this, where I think it might get up to around like 22, 25, even if that's not even his actual salary.
yeah. So, like I said, if I saw a whole, like I'm not giving up picks, I'm not giving up a young player, but if I'm getting DeJounte and a decent, no, I mean beyond Chris.
Oh yeah, yeah.
If it's Chris for DeJounte and somebody interesting as a younger player or something, then maybe I could hear that argument for sure. But if it's just if you have to give up Middleton picks and your just getting Dejounte and then
Oh
some
yeah, no.
filler contract, then I'm not interested at all. Um, but I guess the other one that we'd probably be talking about here beyond Chris is whether Brooke being included would be okay. And I'm interested. I honestly, I'm not 100% sure. I'm probably going to figure this out as we talk, but what are your thoughts on that one?
So sort of to my point before of does it make your team better? I think if it was just a one for one swap, which I highly doubt again that's what it'd be for Brook, but I think it does. But then you also this one would have to include a second trade, which you kind of assume it would with like a Bobby or something in the background to get a center to make it work. So that one's a little bit more difficult to kind of cast because I don't think we could survive if it was just like Brook for DeJounte and then all of a sudden that's your team and then we're going into the playoffs with like Bobby Portis as our center. You probably wouldn't survive doing it like that. But um, sort of speaking to like the same thing with Chris to Brook, you're trading a couple guys potentially or one or the other that Giannis was friends with, which I know means nothing. That's kind of the loyalty factor again, but you already kind of stretched it a little bit with Drew, but obviously you got a buddy that he likes a lot in Damian Lillard now. So that one was kind of you could easily kick that one under the rug and be like, well, Giannis, look at what we got you. It's beautiful Damian Lillard. So now doesn't really care about that, obviously, but at some point the show has got to end with our top three guys outside of Dame, even though it's been fun. And obviously it's the Brook era. We could probably call this the Brook era because ever since Brook got here, we've been incredible. So, um, what he means to kind of this era is a lot. And then, of course, we can talk about how important he is to this our defense. If we didn't have Brook Lopez lean on this year, even if you think that he's taken a step back, even if you think that he hasn't looked as good as he normally does, or that he doesn't really fit well in Adrian's scheme, we've been able to lean on him in certain situations to where we can actually float a little bit on defense. And if we didn't have him this year, I can't even imagine how bad we would be at defense, and we're already bad. So again, I think another trade would have to happen, but just on paper, I do think we would get better. And if that was the offer and I had time to make another trade, I would probably do it. Um, so I guess we can just leave it at that for now. What would you do? Because I would assume it's kind of a similar sort of aspect, but
Yeah,
you might be a lot higher on Brooke, I guess.
I think I am. I still think that this defensive scheme is absolutely killing him. And I was reading on The Athletic, there was a really good article with Seth Partnow, who actually used to work for the Bucks, and has done a ton of really good analytical stuff over the years. And then Archon on Twitter, who started quite a bit of angst when he said that Adrian Griffin should be fired about 2 weeks into the season. He wrote another good article today, and I'm going to pull it up quick, but essentially he pointed to this Athletic article and went a little bit further on the Brook issues and whether they're Brook issues or everything else issues. It's Brook, first of all, he's been third in what Partnow called it's called his points saved metric, and it's something that he designed a while ago for defenders. And Brook ranks third most valuable rim protector in the league by that metric. That's with him being put at this very big disadvantage of being 2-on-1 most of the time, guys coming downhill with a ton of space, and without like any rear contests from point guards, which Drew used to be very, very good at. He was very good. And honestly, Javon Carter was really good at it too. He was always there. He got a ton of blocks last year. And the more I think about it, of him just being behind a guy coming downhill and deflecting it from behind. But he doesn't have that anymore. And he does not have the opportunity to like kind of close space because it's just a guy coming down in wide open space. And I still think that if you just adjust the pressure and have the guys playing a little bit harder, that Brook will look a lot more like Brook than what we've seen this year. And even with that, like I said, it's still been really good in terms of rim protection. I think it reminds me of, I always say this for just sports in general. People remember all of the bad things so much more than the good things. So when he gets beat to the rim by somebody, that's what people remember. They don't remember him contesting a shot that missed. They'll remember the blocks, but they don't remember the ones that he did contest and they missed. They don't remember the ones that he contested really well and they made, and there just wasn't anything he could do about it. And they also don't remember or think about how much he has to worry about how many times this year, I'll just say this, how many times this year have we seen him contest a shot, force a miss, and then his guy gets like a putback dunk underneath because they were just standing there waiting for it. And he seems to get blamed by people for that when that happens. And it's like he had to contest the layup. He can't just leave the layup alone so that his guy doesn't get a putback. Like I just think he's been put in this awful position, and I really don't think he's taken much of a step back at all. I think honestly the step back has probably come more on offense to me, where he's settling even more, it seems like, for shots early. And I liked last year he started to get in the post more and stuff, and that's gone away this year. We really haven't seen him doing that much. I would love to see that come back, but defensively, I just don't. I don't think he's really regressed. Um, all that said, if, like you said, that they made a trade and one, they would need to add more salary to a Brook trade in order, I believe, to get to the Dejounte salary. So
Mhm.
that is part of it too. But the next part of it would be they would absolutely have to add a big man of some sort, and one that is playable and better than Bobby, which shouldn't be super difficult to do, but it's hard to, those guys aren't usually moving. And if they are, there's usually going to be picks and stuff attached to them at this point in the year. So it would be pretty tough to swing. I do wonder, out of all these things, if the most likely, and honestly, this is the only way I truly see it happening, is if you can involve other teams and somebody's really big on Bobby and is willing to give up a first or two in that type of deal, and then we can swing that over to the Hawks as part of a deal, and that's how all of the contracts end up getting matched. I just don't see any other way it happens where it, one, makes sense for the Bucks and they aren't possibly getting worse, and two, where the Hawks are getting something that they would want, because why would they have no use for Bobby or Pat? And
Mhm.
it wouldn't shock me if a team out there views Bobby as like a nice scoring threat off the bench, sixth man type of guy who they think is worth their 2027 first, whatever, something like that. Like, or honestly, the team I keep coming back to is the Thunder, and they're very young and they don't really have a backup big right now. They're a pretty
They've
good
got
defense.
a ton of picks too. We know that.
Correct. They almost, I think they have too many is kind of where I'm going with this. Where they're a team that might be willing to move one or two just for like an okay upgrade to a spot, just because they can't hold on to all of them. They have no way to use all these picks, and they've hit on so many guys that they aren't going to be able to, like, they're not going to be cutting guys from this roster to open up spots for draft picks, or down the road they might decide to put five of them together and make a huge trade too. But that's the team that I keep coming back to. If we're going to make like a three-team deal, I wonder if they would have some interest in Bobby and the ability to move some of those picks. So I mean, that's how I've been looking at it since I saw this news. Brooke and Chris would be pretty tough for me unless there's a real secondary piece that's part of all of it. Um, but I do, that just keeps running through my head. And with the way Horst has been able to pull off these weird three-team deals in the past and stuff, it gives me a slight bit of hope that we could do it without giving up one of those guys. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
hmm No, that's a great way to look at it because even when we got Dame, I remember telling you like, well, we can get like Drew can go somewhere else and we can get picks that way. And you're like, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense. It just doesn't really happen a lot. You think that actually happened a lot more than it does. Um, and then it happened, so that's good. But yeah, I mean, that's a great point with the Bobby and even all three of these guys. I mean, the Hawks, they could probably use like Chris or more than Brooke, but I mean, they got like Clint Capella. So I mean, why would they want Brooke either too? So it would be kind of the same thing. Even if we got rid of Brook, they'd probably not want him, and you got to twist him somewhere else. Um, but yeah, I think just to sort of wrap it up, I think we both kind of agree that it would be the old reliable trade for us of Bobby, Pat, and then whatever young guy you want, and then a second or whatever pick, whatever
Or
at that
two
point.
seconds
But
that we have to offer.
yeah. Um, but I think if it does go into those other guys, I think one positive that I could look at it for sure that I know I'd be right on is because it's literally a fact. I think that we get younger
Yeah.
and then we extend that Giannis window. And I think that's especially with Brooke. I mean, Brooke's been great. And like I said, I already talked about how he was this year, but he is getting a lot older and he's up there in age already right now. So yeah, it's just such a fine line of you have to, and I talked about like the Dame window now that we have. Like, if you think this is the best roster to win the championship this year, I don't even care about age at this point. You should try to go for it this year. So if Brooke is the guy, you should keep Brooke and then try to win the championship this year. Age doesn't really matter at that point. So I think although I just kind of argued against myself there, I think in the past that's probably how I'd think of it. Like, oh, well, we get younger, we can just keep kind of winning and winning and winning, which we could still do. But now we have like almost two windows that we have to worry about. So again, I this was a fun rumor because I think we might even kick the tires on it as like a joke a couple weeks ago. We even said
Yeah.
like, well, maybe we can get Dejounte Murray, and I'm like, I didn't even consider it because I'm like, well, we know what the old reliable trade package is, and that's probably not good enough. And then for all the fit mixes that we just talked about, how it's kind of a clunky fit, even if we got away with that sort of heist. But um, again, fun rumor. I think majority of what this means though, and this can kind of lead us into like our other big topic, but this kind of means that we're going to make a move. And I talked about that a couple of podcasts ago where I'm kind of guaranteeing this is kind of like a stupid bet I made, but I'm kind of guaranteeing Bobby or Pat or both of them will be traded by the end of January, even before the trade deadline. But even if it is the trade deadline, I do think this kind of guarantees that there is going to be a trade, and John knows that we need somebody and something is going to happen for sure. So I think out of anything, even if this comes of nothing and we don't get Dejounte Murray and he goes somewhere else tomorrow, we're looking and we're trying to get better, which is it feels pretty good.
Yeah, I agree.
So leading us into that next topic, since we're now hot in the trade discussions, something that we haven't really brought up, and maybe something that fans haven't really, again, I hate the word casual fan, but maybe just a normal NBA fan wouldn't really even know because this is pretty new to this season and going forward, is the second apron. Um, the second apron that the Bucks are for sure in, right? We're definitely in the second apron right now.
We're over it by
Um,
about 5 million. Yeah.
yeah, so now this does very much concern us. Um, Not so much this season, like the rules don't affect us this year, but they do go into effect next year. So starting this year, this is where they're going to start counting it. But for the 2023-2024 season, the salary cap is $136 million and the tax level is 165, both numbers that the Bucks have blown past. So then we got to start looking at, I think that first apron is technically the tax level, right? So I
Yep.
think most teams are past the first apron. So then going into the second apron, that would be 182 million, which you said that we're over 5 million on, so we're about 187 million on. So what does that mean when you're in the second apron? There's a couple of different rules that we have to think about now. Where really the whole reason why they're doing this is because of all the big trades and stuff. They're trying to limit as many stars you can have in a team and just trying to get rid of like these super teams. So that's why a Dame trade this last offseason kind of made sense. But we'll break that all down in a second. But so some of these rules now that kind of handicap teams now if you are in the second apron going into next season, how does it affect you? So first, teams will no longer be able to use the taxpayer mid-level exception, which for teams like us, we've been in the tax. Like I said, I kind of call it the Brook era for a while. Um, Really, ever since then, we've been in the tax. And you can think about guys that we picked up. We wouldn't have Bobby Portis on this team right now. I can't think of. We've used it on like George Hill. I remember we used it on.
Yep.
We kind of split it up a little bit between a couple of guys, but it's just at that point, if you're over the taxer and you're in the second apron, you're not going to be able to get a mid level, which means you're only going to be able to get minimum guys. Um, so that very much handicaps you. And the mid level is going up each year. Now, I might even be close to like $10 million for a guy you can get with that mid level. And there's a couple different levels to mid levels, but the highest mid level is like $10 million. Second, if a team remains in the second apron 3 out of the next 5 years, their first round draft pick automatically goes to the end of the round, beginning next season. So in the next 5 years, I mean, the Bucks don't really have to worry about this because we don't necessarily have our picks. But let's just say that we are in the second apron, which we probably close to will be for the next probably close to 5 years if we have Dame for the next four-ish. Um, Maybe we escape it. We only have to be 3 out of the 5 years. So I kind of bet that we will be. Even if we have a down year 1 year, we're going to be picking 30th, or if we're I don't really know how they decide that between teams because I'm sure that a couple teams will qualify for that. So it probably goes by record at that point in the
Yeah.
back of the draft. But um, we'll be somewhere in the back of the draft no matter how our record looks, which is, again, something that we don't really care about because we kind of treat draft picks like we just toss them to other teams because we're trying to get better all the time. But that is something to think about. Next, First round picks 7 years out, a valuable asset for capped out contenders. Um, Cannot be traded beginning next season. So that this kind of means tr first round picks all the way down the line. You can't trade that anymore. Which for a team like the Bucks who don't have immediate first round picks to trade, that's going to cap you even more because you're not going to be able to add another first round pick that we don't care about in non-Giannis years at that point. It would be for sure. Um, Next, salaries cannot be aggregated or combined to trade a player, or for like a single player. So we can't say our old reliable package that we have. If we have that same package next year, Bobby and Pat, we can't combine that next year and go and get you name the player for 20 plus million dollars. You can't do that anymore. You could go like one for one, but you can't add guys together and then get another bigger contract, which is kind of again avoiding some of those super teams where like the Suns got Bradley Beal for a bunch of contracts that didn't matter. Um, it's just it's going to handicap you a lot. And then second to last rule that they got here is teams can't use the trade exceptions created from a prior year. Um, I I'm sure we've used it at some point, I think, in the past. I don't know if that maybe Mirotic trade we might have used that on, but just salaries that you had that's dead money and you can't use anymore to add it into salaries. And then last, teams can no longer use cash in trades, which is kind of the same idea. So knowing all this, knowing how handicapped we will be in the future, this is kind of our last year of freedom a little bit to act like a normal NBA team, regardless of how much money we're spending or not spending. So Spencer, I guess after hearing all these rules, and we've known about them for quite a while, um, how do you think the Bucks should kind of navigate this sort of trade deadline, knowing that all of these rules are looming? Because regardless of what we do or don't do, we're probably going to be in the second apron next year, which all these rules will be going into effect. So why is this kind of our last sort of go around to go out and get a guy for our
Yeah.
old reliable package or whatever the package may be? Why is this kind of our last shot at it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the main point, right? This is the last year that they could combine Pat and Bobby and potentially a Marjon or anybody else, whatever salary they need to get somebody in that 22, $25 million range. And the reason that's important, not just because you would be hoping to upgrade the roster now, obviously, in that type of trade, but you're also planning for the future in that you could trade that $25 million person for another $25 million person. Whereas next year you would not be able to get anybody for more than what one for one Bobby would cost you in money. I shouldn't say one for one. You could combine them, but you would have to get two players back that are the same. So it's pretty much one for one. Um, that I mean that's the main reason they are going to want to combine these contracts in order to give themselves the most flexibility in the future because right now they're going to be consider how little flexibility they have currently. It gets way worse after this year. They will have, in most years, they would be adding a first round pick that they could trade this offseason. They will not be getting that pick to trade because of that 7 years out rule. They won't be able to combine salaries anymore after this year. Any of the first round pick stuff beyond that from the apron really shouldn't matter because, like what Gunnar talked about, it's probably something where the Bucks are either going to be picking at the end of the round anyway because they're still a solid or really good team, or I would bet that if they fall off, they will get themselves below the second apron. So I don't think it'll affect it at that point. Um, but not having the taxpayer mid-level means you're not going to be able to add anybody other than veteran minimums, which they hit big time on like Malik Beasley this offseason with a vet minimum, but it's pretty rare to find guys of that level at the minimum. Um, it's really just it's the last chance they have to add another big salary, and that means that they probably won't be able to do it in any way moving forward if they don't do it at this deadline. So to me, that's the reason they need to worry about it quite a bit in the next few weeks, and it's something that I'm sure Horst is. I'm 100% sure he's well aware of it. I'm sure he's trying to find a way to make those two to turn those two into something. I mean, that's why the dream of Dejounte is twofold. It's he would help the team if it's those two for him somehow, and it would also give us another contract that becomes a tradable asset down the line, whether he's good or whether he's not. It's just another contract that we can potentially move If he's great, then he's a Buck and it doesn't matter. But if he's not, then he's a guy that could be used to potentially add someone else who might help the Bucks. So, I mean, that's the gist of it. It's a mess. I know they made it to try and prevent super teams. To me, all it did was end up hurting again, kind of teams like the Bucks who, and it's funny, it seems like rule changes always happen right when the Bucks are going to be hurt by them the most. I know
Hmm.
that's probably not exactly how it works, but it feels like that happens a lot where rule changes happen just as the Bucks are starting to finally get into this upper echelon of payroll, and now you get all these penalties for doing it. It's like this wasn't there the entire time. The Bucks were struggling to compete with everybody else, but as soon as we get up there, it comes in. So it's it just kind of sucks, and it is something that the Bucks need to be very, very cognizant of during the deadline. And hopefully, my hope is that even if we don't need to talk about other trade targets or anything, but I think even if you maybe slightly downgrade in terms of value, if you feel like, oh, Bobby and Pat weren't worth that person, but it doesn't really hurt the team in general, and it adds that salary spot, like that amount of money can be part of a trade in the future, I do think that's worth it. Whether you don't want to do it for just anybody, but if you can do it for somebody who at least holds face with the team and adds that salary spot, I think that would be the something they have to do. So I don't know if you have
Hmm.
different thoughts or anything on that.
No, all the same thoughts. I just think the NBA is probably, I mean, they love the trade deadline, I'm sure, because it brings great ratings and everything. But I think this, for every reason you just said, the Bucks aren't an original team who we're the only team who has to deal with this sort of rule change. Everyone, or a good amount of the good teams, have to deal with this as well. So I think this trade deadline in general is just going to be crazy with whether or not it's bigger names, bigger contracts going different places because of the same things that we just talked about. And then, yeah, obviously on a future podcast, maybe the next one, maybe a one after that's got to be sometime soon because it's a trade sort of podcast. But we'll probably have a trade sort of discussion where we're going to come up with some fake trades or something that we like or whatever. But don't be shocked when some of those trades are for bigger salaries because of every reason that you just said. Um, but then, yeah, I mean, I think if you do make a trade like that too, you can always take a step back versus there is no step forward at that point. So if we do get a guy, like you said, that's a bigger salary, we can always shed him for parts. But if you can't take the parts and then go get somebody else big at that point in the future. So that's just why now is the time, even though these rules aren't really affecting us this season or anything. And I think even I heard Zach Lowe on a podcast too talk about how you don't really get affected by, I think next year it starts, but you don't really have to pay something like you don't have to pay the tax or something next year. I don't know what he was talking about, but basically you can kind of go through next year with the same type of rules, I think. And then like say up to the next trade deadline, maybe we can like shed the salary and then like get under it again. And then you can somehow operate under those rules. I don't know what he was talking about, but something how it's really up to like the trade deadline next off season or next season, and then the off season after that is when you start to get the actual effects of like the being in the second apron and like the tax and stuff. But just something to think about again. And um, again, we haven't really talked about it much in the Bucks, as you said. Like it's not we're being in Milwaukee, you're not usually used to like these high salaries or like these high just team salaries in general, but um finally that we get it here, then now we're getting penalized for it, which kind of sucks. But I guess that kind of wraps up the second apron talk here. Um, and going into, I guess, our other news that we've gotten, the last big sort of news kind of went under the wire a little bit here, but I actually think a lot of people care about this news was that Amazon bought Bally Sports. Um, People who like us who hate Bally Sports for many reasons. One being that the product sucks in general, and then two, I mean, I think back to even like our championship year, like we couldn't even like watch it really unless you had like cable, and then we had to. I would never do it, but of course people were trying to trying to watch the Bucks and whatnot. Like it just wasn't even accessible to some people. And then now it's finally accessible, but you have to pay for it outside of that. Then the product there's a couple games this year that we talked about where you couldn't even watch the games because it just simply didn't work. Um, Amazon in general is a good product. And just for sports in general, I think they've actually handled it pretty well. So, um, I'm excited about that and the idea that I can actually just not think about watching the Bucks. I can just watch the Bucks, not have to worry about anything else. So, Spencer, what do you think about this breaking news that we're
Yeah.
finally getting rid of Bally Sports?
Well, we will see how all of this plays out. I'm curious if it doesn't seem 100% confirmed or not, if it's going to be just part of Prime or if you're going to have to pay beyond that to get the package for your teams. Um, I think it should be pretty good though. I think, like you said, it's going to be it should be an upgrade over what we've had with Bally. And I think for me, it'll just be nice to not have to worry about that stupid app. I don't care about anything else, but that app is that app is just it's awful. And we know that Amazon Prime stuff, like for NFL Thursday night games and stuff, works well, that the streaming works really well. And that's with a lot more people watching than what you're going to get for local games and stuff. So I don't think there should be any issues. I would imagine it's going to go a lot better. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, I was definitely excited. I'm just curious to see how it all is actually going to work in the end. But if it's, I mean, as long as it's not as much or it's the same as Bally, I'm not going to have any issue with it. That should not be a problem. So, um, we're running pretty long here. So let's get into our random bucks. So, Gunner, who'd you have here?
I had good old Charlie Bell. I was looking at just all-time Bucks leaders, and it's just randomly the other day. And obviously, he's not up there for a lot of categories, but he is still up there for like three-pointers made and three-pointers attempted and stuff. So he kind of popped in my brain, but a little bit underrated guy in that sort of dark era of the Bucks when we first got our red jerseys back. Um, Good reliable three-point shooter, not much else. He has some good memories with him. I mean, I think he was on the purple jersey Bucks too. I remember watching him when we had purple jerseys as well. But kind of an underrated guy for a guy who back then, I mean, 3-point specialists weren't always a huge thing because I mean they were, but not like they are now. I mean, he his volume of what he actually shot probably would be like a very average 3-point shooter now. Volume based, he was a good 3-point shooter overall, but. Yeah, good underrated Buck, nice guy. I think he went to the Warriors after us and still had a decent career too. So,
Yeah.
good old Charlie Bell, we miss you. So,
He played one more year after the Bucks stint. He was
damn,
actually overseas for 3 years before he came to Milwaukee. I did not know that.
wow.
I'm looking at it now, but yeah, no, he was definitely a shooter. I would have thought he was actually higher volume than he was too. It was 3.2, 2.8, 3.4, 4.4 per game. So, but no, he was fun because I mean, as a kid, I was a shooter, and that was what he did. It was fun. It was nice to see somebody who could just chuck up some shots. And I mean, I don't remember honestly too much about him other than him shooting. I wasn't as big into paying attention to defense at that point, but yeah, mine's very random, and I don't even know why I care about him or anything, but Jorge Gutierrez, I just have very vivid memories of the Jason Kidd uh, season that he gave Gutierrez randomly like 10 to 15 minutes a game for like 2 weeks and then never played him again and then he was gone. Um, yeah, it looks like he played 10 total games for the Bucks. But he was I don't know what it was about him. He was kind of like the prototypical point guard. He could not shoot at all, but he was just straight up like run the offense, play hard on defense, move the ball. I didn't think he was very good, but I just have he fits into the Jason Kidd era of point guards for me, which was a very funny time looking back on it when you had MCW, Tyler Ennis, Jorge Gutierrez, you had Grievous Vasquez, who we had to go out and get, and I will never ever talk. Uh, I'm done talking about him already. I'm not gonna talk about him, but um, he just always, for some reason, always pops into my head when I'm thinking of the Kid era and their point guards and any random Buck. He's always on the top of my list for some reason. So, shout out to Jorge. I don't know how he's doing. I have no idea if he played basketball. He played for the Nets he played for the Nets before the Bucks, and they played for the Hornets for like another 12 game stretch. But he hopefully he's doing well. I don't know. Hopefully he's having a great life. Yeah, okay. We've gone very long again. We might need to start figuring out some ways to cut this, but for those of you listening, again, please thank you for listening, first of all, and please like and subscribe on whatever platform you are on. Remember to follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod. Like I mentioned, we do have a giveaway running right now. Please feel free to leave us feedback on how we can get better. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time.
See ya.